right, it's time to continue with these schedule preview and prediction videos. Today we're going with the Penn State Nittany Lions. Nittany Lions, last year, same song and dance. They go 10-2. They lose to Michigan and Ohio State. And this last year had to have felt the most deflating losses in this whole thing. We've known Penn State as the school that basically goes 10-2 every year, with losses going to Michigan and Ohio State. When you can't get past a certain wall as a team, it's already deflating enough. But last year, when you played Michigan, they were without Harbaugh, and they still managed to beat you. When you played Ohio State, they were putting out a new quarterback, Kyle McCord. They still beat you. This has got to be eating at the soul of Penn State. And I'm going to say it. You may agree with it. You may not agree with it. But I'm one of these people that believes that this is a prove-it year for James Franklin. If James Franklin cannot get past that wall of 10-2, if they cannot make it to the Big Ten title game, if they can't make it to the 12-team playoff, I think we've seen in that case, we've seen enough, and you can officially can James Franklin. And I know it's one thing to hear it from an outside observer, but what about the Penn State fans? Are the Penn State fans content with going 10-2 every year, losing to Michigan and Ohio State? Are they content to just stay not at the top of their conference? Are they content to stay not in the playoff? Because if there would have been a 12-team playoff last year, I don't think you could have justified putting Penn State in there. Something needs to change with Penn State to justify keeping James Franklin, and that's especially true now that the Big Ten has expanded. Oregon predicted to be one of the top people in the Big Ten this year. They're coming in from the Pac-12. Teams that are expected to be dominant of the Big Ten in future years: USC, Washington, and once Michigan rebuilds, they're predicted to be dominant in the Big Ten again. Do you necessarily think Penn State would be able to compete with James Franklin there? There's evidence to suggest no. Now, maybe we get proven completely wrong, and James Franklin in this new Big Ten is able to compete. But from the evidence that has been shown since the beginning of James Franklin's tenure, I would say Penn State's probably not going to compete long-term if they keep James Franklin there. It's a stagnant program going nowhere, and they've hit a peak, and they haven't fallen, but they haven't progressed either. In college football, if you're staying where you're at, you're getting left behind. And that's especially true, I said, with the Big Ten expanding, the playoff expanding. How do you justify keeping James Franklin if you can't really go anywhere? And I know somebody in the comment section is probably going to say, I'm a little too harsh on James Franklin, that his only losing season at Penn State so far was the COVID year. He's won them a Big Ten title game. That's true. But that Big Ten title game and win was in 2016. 8 years without a Big Ten title. Are Penn State fans happy with that? Are they happy that their team has basically been going nowhere for the past 8 years? I'll tell you of two teams in the past who were not happy with that. One of them, LSU. We all remember Les Miles. He took over for Saban after after Saban left LSU, and within 3 years he wins the national title. He also got him another SEC title in 2011 and a national title appearance that year. Now, granted, they lost to Bama, but still. And at no point under Les Miles' tenure at LSU did LSU have a losing season. But after a while, LSU just got fed up of going nowhere, being stuck behind Florida and Alabama in their own conference. That also was aided by the fact that Les Miles had some very stupid clock management issues. They finally canned him, and then 4 years later, LSU wins the national title and puts on the greatest team we've ever seen. Another good example, Georgia. We all remember Mark Richt. And Mark Richt, he even won an SEC title and the 2 other SEC title appearances. Only one losing season, and even in that losing season, they went 6-6 and lost in the bowl game. Heck, the year they fired him, he had 10 wins and only 3 losses. But yet, they couldn't handle more years under the guy that had them going nowhere for 15 years. They can him, bring in Kirby Smart. Yeah. I don't think Georgia fans are going to argue with 2 national titles. My point being, Penn State has to be frustrated with James Franklin at this point. Do you really think that James Franklin's going to bring you to the next level, or do you think it's time to move on? I would say if we get the same old from Penn State, it's time to move on from James Franklin. Now, we do have to talk about what has lost and what has been brought in for Penn State. First off, last year you got rid of your offensive coordinator, finally fired him, so maybe that helps a little bit. Mike Urick, he's gone. You now are going to end up bringing in, I apologize if I mispronounce his last name, but Andy Kotelnicki. He's going to be the offensive coordinator. You're also going to bring in Tom Allen to help the defense. In terms of players, nothing really notable to report in terms of draft-wise. Penn State's mostly keeping their roster from last year with a few notable exceptions, both of them coming from the receiving core. Dante Cephas, he transfers out. He goes to Kansas State. And Keandre Lambert-Smith, he's transferring out to Auburn. Now, in terms of notable incoming transfers, you have Julian Fleming coming from your conference rival Ohio State, and another guy whose last name I'm probably going to botch, but Nolan Ruki. He comes in from Wisconsin. So, and also another key thing to mention about Penn State's roster is that they are returning their quarterback, Drew Aller, or Drew Aller, however his name's pronounced. I think a lot of Penn State's success or lack thereof that's going to happen in 2024 is going to be heavily dependent on how Drew Aller is going to be in 2024. If Aller has a good season, then I think Penn State probably reaches where they've been wanting to go for the past 10 years. If Drew Aller has a mediocre to bad season, I think we see the same old, or worse from Penn State. Now let's get into the schedule. Now that I've talked about what had happened last year, ranted about James Franklin, and told you what Penn State is bringing back as well as losing. Start off in week 1 against West Virginia. This game is going to be on Fox at the noon slot. I think what happened to West Virginia is a case of short-term success that will cost them long-term. The big debate in terms of West Virginia last year was should they can Neil Brown, and what ends up happening is Neil Brown brings them to a 7-win season. So of course you can't can Neil Brown at that point. You got to keep him. I, among others, do not necessarily think Neil Brown is a good coach, and I think it's going to hurt West Virginia this year. I think Penn State should be able to beat West Virginia this year. Even though it's at West Virginia, there's nothing really that screams West Virginia is going to win this game, so I got Penn State winning the game. Then you come home, you play Bowling Green, should be able to win that one. Then you have another badly timed bye week. What is it with the Big Ten powerhouses and getting badly timed bye weeks? We saw that with Ohio State, where they got a bye week in the third week of the season, and now Penn State has a bye week in the third week of the season. Badly timed bye weeks here. And also another thing too, it would be one thing if either before or after the bye week you had one of your major opponents. In the case of the first bye week, neither of the ones that the one before the bye week isn't a major opponent, and the one after the bye week isn't a major opponent. You get Kent State at home. What? Well, it could be scheduling conflicts too. Maybe it wasn't necessarily 100% in the hands of Penn State, but I would think Penn State would have wanted to put bye week number 1 at a better time. But anyway, you get Kent State after the bye week. I think you dominate them. Then you have Illinois in your third consecutive home game. Illinois kind of had success a couple years ago and has fallen completely off the map. I think you beat them handily. Then you get conference newcomer, the UCLA Bruins. UCLA kind of had really bad timing. They were coming into the Big Ten under the presumption that Chip Kelly would be following with them. Instead, Chip Kelly left them almost in February. It was like late January by the time Chip Kelly decided to leave. He's going to Ohio State. By that point, there is really no major coaching candidates left, so UCLA really had no choice but to promote internally and hope for the best this coming season. I'm not really expecting much from UCLA this year. I think Penn State destroys them. Then you get your first conference away game at USC. Now, USC may have the toughest West Coast stadium out there, but the key word I said there is West Coast Stadium. There are much rowdier stadiums on the East Coast, and I think it's really just because the West Coast doesn't really have as much as an emphasis on football as the East Coast does. You look at the national champions from the past decade and a half. It's all been East Coast teams. Randomly, you may get one West Coast team that makes it to the national title game, or in the case of like last decade, there was USC did have one national title game and national title win, but the national champions are predominantly East Coast teams. Now, I know USC's stadium can in some cases give East Coast stadiums rival with them, but I think Penn State's really been through worse. I think Penn State's going to be able to beat USC. USC by that point still going to be adjusting. They lost Caleb Williams, the Heisman-winning quarterback. Now they do overhaul the defense. They finally fired the worst defensive coordinator in the country, Alex Grinch. But I still think at that point USC is trying to put things together. So I think Penn State called them at a good time. I think Penn State's going to win. Then you get your second bye week right after the USC game. This one actually is a little bit better time because it's right in between two road games inside the conference. So I think that one was actually a better place for the bye week. You get Wisconsin on the road. Wisconsin, I think, is building under Luke Fickell. but I think Wisconsin still isn't where I think they're going to beat a powerhouse. Well, I do have them beating Oregon, so maybe you consider them a powerhouse, although Oregon hasn't been in the wasn't in the Big Ten until this year. I don't think Wisconsin beats Penn State, though. I have Penn State winning this game. Then you have the toughest game of the year on your schedule. You have Ohio State. Ohio State still has Ryan Day as their head coach. Ryan Day, all he's done is every year you get this dominant season out of Ohio State. This game was, well, you already saw my Ohio State preview and prediction video, so you know where I'm picking with this one. I think Penn State should be able to get the win over Ohio State. Two evenly matched teams. I still honestly think Ohio State may actually be better as a team than Penn State. But ultimately, I went with home field advantage, and I think Penn State is able to get the win at home. If it were away or in a neutral site, I would have said Ohio State. But because it's in Penn State's home stadium, I think that pushes Penn State over the line to beat Ohio State. And I think a lot of Penn State fans, if they manage to beat Ohio State this year, are going to be over the moon. And I think this is a year where you have to beat Ohio State. You are on an 8-game losing streak to Ohio State. This year, they have a quarterback who's coming in from the Big 12. And the team just resembles a team that's in win-now mode. I think you have to beat Ohio State this year if you want to prove that you can compete in this Big Ten. And so I do think you beat them. Then you play Washington. I already explained in the Washington video. Washington's in a full-on rebuilding mode. Half their team is gone from last year. Their entire coaching staff gone, with 9 out of 10 of them being in Tuscaloosa now. They bring in, is it Jed Fisk or Jeff Fisk? I think it's Jeff Fisk. He is coming in from Arizona. Not 100% sold on the guy. He had the 10-win season last year with Arizona. The other 2 seasons he's had has been losing seasons. So there's no way of telling if that season was just an outlier or if he truly built Arizona State. No, not Arizona State, Arizona. But I think Washington's in for a very tough year this year. I think Penn State is able to beat them. Then you go at Purdue. Purdue hasn't been the same since 2022. I think you beat them. At Minnesota, another easy game there. I think you win. Then you come home to play Maryland. And I am off the hype train. Oops, sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm off the hype train when it comes to Maryland. Every year, it's basically said Maryland's going to have a decent year. They're going to beat somebody they never should have beaten. And it never happens. I'm off the hype train. And until Maryland actually has a decent season and beats a Big Ten powerhouse, I am not buying into the hype. I think Penn State should be able to beat Maryland. And there you go. I think Penn State goes 12-0. With the Big Ten in the shape that it's in, Penn State doesn't play Michigan. They also managed to dodge Oregon. They catch Ohio State at home. I think Penn State should be able to bring it together. Now, if they don't bring it together, then I think you have to have the possibility of James Franklin no longer being there. Because at what point is it not acceptable to stay where you're at? In college football, you are either moving forward or you're moving backward. And if you're staying exactly where you're at, well, guess what? You're moving backwards because eventually you're going to get passed. And nothing about James Franklin ever since that 2016 season where he won the Big Ten has screamed that he's moving forward. I think if you get more of the same this year from James Franklin, then you have to can him and look for somebody else. All right, that's it for Penn State. Next one, I'm not quite sure who I'm gonna do. I think I'm gonna go ahead and go with the. It's either gonna be the ACC with Clemson or the Big 12 with Kansas State. Watch on Twitter to see who it's going to be. But anyway, this is Roll Tide 99. I'm out of here. I'll see you later.